Okay, so this is a video about a lot of things. It is a video about the changing nature of the product management function, specifically with concepts like AI, vibe coding, and the evolution of no code development tools like Claude Code and Gemini, CLI, how it's going to impact the product management function. The second thing that we're actually going to talk about is how far can we actually go with respect to creating an application without writing a single line of code, aka using vibe coding. Can you actually create something functional which can be validated, used to demonstrate a specific capability, and allow the users or the key stakeholders to be able to evangelize what we're actually talking about in more detail? And also, we'll talk briefly about what are the specific cases where it's probably a really, really bad idea to use vibe coding or applications which actually are built using these no code, low code AI tools. So, just to give you an example, this is an example application that I've actually created now. What it does is it basically enables a user to get better at learning a language, and in this case, the language that you select is German. Can the user actually have practical real life practice on the language, which is actually extremely hard to replicate in a digitized setting? Can we actually enable the user to kind of build on certain grammatic topics and specifically get down to building their capabilities in specific key areas where they are weak? And can the inputs of whatever we interact with this application be used as a way to expand vocabulary? So this is an entire application that we have built without writing a single line of code, purely through prompting, iteration, and conceptualization. And we will go through each of these functionalities in more detail, one step at a time. Okay, so let's talk about what can be built. And thinking about language learning, what are the key skills that a person really needs to know to before they really can say that they know the language? Obviously, we're not talking about foundational skills. We talk about different grammar topics, vocabulary, and for example, articles, how you use connectors, and things of that nature. Now, those clearly are topics that are better suited through traditional means, whether it's through classroom or through videos or in a command format which explains how they need to work. Now, there at the same time, there's a huge leap between a student actually knowing the theory of what needs to be done and being able to actually practice it in a manner that they can speak to a German native confidently. And that is the bridge that we aim to connect here. Now, traditionally, these experiences were really hard and in a lot of cases not really possible without very severe hand coding, but obviously a lot of the LLMs have improved that. So let's just think about it. We're talking about four key skills. We're talking about writing and speaking, which are creational skills where you need to be able to think on the fly to create the content in hand. And then you're also talking about hearing and reading, which are not really passive, but at the same time is don't require an immediate recall of the words itself. It's more about trying to understand the meaning. So these are the four skill sets that we'll aim to address quickly in like a 2 minute summary. So let's start with writing. Now, how does a typical writing exercise operate? The teacher gives us a piece of instruction, we write it down, the teacher corrects it and gives it back to us. It probably comes back in a day or two because obviously there's a lot of work to be done. But what if I can actually write and have the corrections on the fly? And let's think about it. This is the first part of the application. And I can just write what I need to do. Let's say this is an introduction. Um, Ich bin Aditya und ich komme aus Indien. Okay, so I've just written, you know, typically one of the first few sentences that we end up learning in a German class. And what happened? Is it correct? Is it not correct? So I have an immediate correction that actually comes on the right, saying, ish is probably redundant, and this is what you mean when you actually said what you said. Ich habe in Berlin wohnt seit 2 Jahren und lebe hier mit meiner Frau und 2 Kindern. Now, the second sentence, obviously, I made a lot more mistakes, but you can actually see the application is able to make the corrections. It is able to actually tell me what I'm doing right on or wrong on the fly, and even able to tell me what I actually meant with what I said. So think of a Google Translate, a correction mechanism, as well as you know recommendations about what I could have used when I'm actually trying to write this. So this is a sample applet, and think about it. I've actually written all of this with no code. I've just prompted it, and we have ended up creating an application which gives us now one more interesting aspect. We can even tell the user, how exactly is the complexity level of the sentences that I've used. So sentence complexity, grammar, vocabulary, and accuracy. So if you actually bring this whole thing together, this actually extrapolates a lot of exercises that we actually end up doing once every few weeks and enables the learner to be able to actually do this in a very short burst of time without much hassle, and you have the corrections right here that you can actually end up doing. So this is the first part of the writing. Now think about the next one, saying speaking. How do we actually go about speaking? Again, I won't spend too much time on this, but well, I want to talk about the theme of Essen and Trinken, and let's start off. Hallo, wie geht's dir?
Mir geht's gut, danke. Und dir? Hast du schon entschieden, was du heute Abend kochen willst?
Ja, ich bin nicht so hungrig, so ich glaube, ich würde ein bisschen Äpfel und vielleicht ein bisschen Juice haben. Ja, das ist mein Plan.
Ach, nur ein Apfel? Tschüss dann auch. Hast du denn jetzt ein leckeres Abendessen? Ach super. Was planst du denn zu kochen? Hast du ein Lieblingsrezept?
Okay, so as you can see over here, we have 2 to 3 things that actually we've done. It understands what I've said, it has a conversation with me, and at the same time, it actually tells me the mistakes that I've actually made in the process. So over here, you can actually see this. There are a few mistakes. So these are examples of how we can actually improvise on the talking section.
Streit um Heizungsgesetz spitzt sich zu, Lindner lehnt Eckpunkte ab. Berlin, der Streit um das geplante Gebäudeenergiegesetz spitzt sich weiter zu.
So as you
Bundesfinanzminister
can see over
Christian
here,
Lindner, FDP, lehnte am heute.
okay, so as you can see here, what it does, it actually reads through, it creates the news, generates it for the day based on real-time information. It has a German and English version, and it also points out to us exactly what it is reading in both German and English with key vocabulary up front. Now, if we think of it from a reader standpoint, quite often it's extremely common that even when a listener doesn't understand 2 to 3 keywords of a particular sentence, they are not able to comprehend the entire meaning. So this essentially aims to mitigate that with multiple mechanisms which allow you to comprehend things better in a real life scenario. Now, the jump from being able to understand 80% of this to an actual podcast will actually be much smaller. Now, Yes, the voice right now is robotic. We can actually use the right level of voice modulation mechanisms. But again, mind you, all of this was done without any kind of line of code, but it was just to validate at a conceptual level whether you know this the existing tools are able to provide us with a usable prototype which can be validated with key stakeholders and a small set of users in a kind of simple validation test without actually building out the whole thing. Now, this is the end of the practical part. You talk about reading and hearing, which is what this was. We spoke about writing, which was the letter writing exercise, and we spoke about speaking. Next, the more kind of foundational grammatic and vocabulary choices. Now, the next topics are slightly more kind of simpler than what we actually spoke about before. Let's talk about grammar. Now, articles, huge problem for anybody knowing German. It takes a lot of continuous practice for someone to get better. So, can we actually get down the path where we, just allow the user to keep, kind of playing around with this, knowing what they got right and wrong, so that they can go down the path. So, this is a simple case studied as articles. What is the article, and not just what is the article, why is the article, what is it? For example, Brooker structures in E are often feminine, so therefore it explains not just what the article is, but why it is what it is. Similar, start, D start, yes. Places ending in DT are often feminine. So this is a more interactive, personalized way, and it gets even more personalized when you start focusing on the specific articles that you got wrong and the specific heuristic that you're often getting wrong, so you can actually improve. So that is just a mechanism for us to get better. Similar, we won't go into all these other cases. Can I allow the user to get better with um, you know adjective definitions? So how do you actually say the small child in in a sentence? So to the small child, so ein kleines Kind. Okay, so this is the example that I've given. This is the attempt I've made. It says, no, it's not ein kleines Kind, but it's dem kleinen Kind because, it's dative. So it just tells me what I've done wrong. It has a table. So it's just a better way to learn, which actually allows you to practice in the weak areas. Finally, talking about vocabulary, I have, we interact with the writing, the reading, the hearing. At the end of it, all of those can actually feed into a vocabulary program. For example, this is a sample word that I got wrong when I was speaking to the AI. So it said, hey, do you really know what this is? So yes, well, yes, I do know it. So it kind of moves along. So I think the broad concept is there are some functionalities that were always possible that you can kind of enable or that you can build in a much simpler fashion, at least if you want to validate the concept and make it more personalized. At the same time, there's a whole new host of capabilities, specifically around the generative format and for the conversational format and the interactive format that can be unlocked, which actually could never have been done before. So, all of these are things that you can actually end up doing with minimal effort. Like, for example, this was something that I've been thinking about for a while, I've been playing around for a while, but at the same time, the actual tooling and building of it is probably, just not more than 6 to 8 hours of sorts of back and forth. And again, this was of interest to me because this is a theme that I have been spending a lot of time on, so I know what it is like as a learner to go through the exercise and what are the kind of challenges that I face. So that is the basis with which I actually created this entire end-to-end experience. And this is something that I'm actually using in addition to all my course material to actually help me prepare for the test and get better at the language as a whole in a more practical manner. Now let's talk a little bit about just vibe coding in general and how does it actually impact the PM field. Now, should PMs do this? At what points in time should they do this? And what are the things that they should actually use it for? And what are the cases in which they should actually stay away from this? Now, one caveat right up front. This is not a mechanism to build production applications. Let's be absolutely clear about that. There are a huge amount of security constraints, there are a huge amount of scalability constraints, architectural constraints, and actually building an app that you're going to be putting out in production is something that absolutely needs to be left to the developer who's the best suited, left to the architect who's best suited to structure how it should actually be done. But when we're actually talking about PRs or PRFAQs or concept notes or presentations, now sometimes there's a lot of back and forth between the product manager and the users, where the PM is not necessarily able to articulate completely cleanly, what they're trying to do, and even mock up tests and showing them the detailed flows in a conceptual manner doesn't give the same level of feedback that you would when as when they're actually dealing with the application as a whole. So clearly, validating concepts and building a prototype for you to get early feedback and actually be able to validate how things work is a fantastic way. Now, something of this sort is going to be way more effective at what we are trying to do than a PRD or a Jira ticket or a mock-up that's being worked on jointly with design. Now, you need to get to that phase, but the minute you do some level of early iteration on this, you can actually use that. Secondly, I think it's a fantastic tool when you're actually trying to build person, single use case applications. Now think of an Excel sheet or Word document. Sometimes you're doing it to run through your calculations, validate your assumptions, and trying to see how things play out in an individualistic setting. In this case, if you're trying to build an application, as long as it's not mission critical, and as long as the output of this is not something that would heavily, waste the time of a lot of other people, well, why not? Why not build something which actually allows you to simplify a particular workflow and actually integrate LLMs and various other things which are, you know, which heavily allow you to automate things. Now, obviously, we need to be aware of the probabilistic nature of LLMs, but at the same time, as long as it's not a mission critical need and something that allows you to get a lot deeper at scale, well, this frankly is a no brainer that you go down the path and use these tools.